I used to think I was good at being invisible. Not in some grand, tragic way. Just in the small rhythms of a 20-something who hadn't quite found where he fit. I went about my days quietly, carrying groceries up too many stairs, heating leftovers that never looked as good as they did on the box, pausing halfway through drafting a text to someone I wasn't sure would reply. She noticed me anyway. It started at the corner coffee shop, the kind that smelled faintly of burnt beans and rain-soaked coats. I went most mornings because it was cheaper than turning the heater on in my apartment, and they never rushed you if you lingered. That's where I first caught her eyes on me. Not in some cinematic sweep, but more like the way you notice a draft in the room. She was by the window, her hair pinned up in a loose way that looked both careful and careless at once. A paperback lay open in front of her, spine worn, pages marked with pen. She wasn't looking at me directly. Her gaze hovered, unfocused, like she was half lost in whatever she was reading. Still, I felt it. The next morning, it happened again. This time she was at the counter when I ordered. She tilted her head, not quite smiling. "Black coffee. No sugar, right?" she said. I froze. "You remembered?" She shrugged lightly. "You've been here 3 times this week." Hard not to. I tried to laugh, but it came out awkward, like I wasn't sure if I was being teased. She let the silence stretch, then handed me a napkin with my cup. Her fingers brushed mine for half a second longer than necessary. Or maybe I only imagined it. Back in my apartment later, I caught myself folding that napkin into neat squares while my leftovers cooled. By the time I realized, the food was cold. There was nothing dramatic about the days that followed. Just more moments, her sliding her chair back when I passed, like she'd been waiting. A dry comment about how the shop's playlist hadn't changed in 2 years. Me nodding, trying not to stare at the way her hands curled around her mug. I didn't tell anyone. There wasn't anyone to tell, really. My phone stayed full of unsent drafts, half thoughts I couldn't bring myself to release into the world. But she kept finding me. One evening, rain had pinned everyone indoors. The coffee shop was packed, only one empty seat left, across from her. I hesitated at the door, pretending to check my phone, before she caught my eye. She tapped the chair with a quiet insistence. "You're late," she said, sliding her book aside. "I didn't know we had a schedule," I replied. Her lips curved, but she didn't explain. We sat there, the silence filled with the sound of cups clinking and rain against glass. I tried not to fidget, but my fingers betrayed me, tracing the rim of my mug, then flicking toward her hand where it rested on the table. She didn't move it. We didn't talk much. Just small things. Neighbors leaving their lights on, the coffee tasting different tonight, her dog keeping her up with late-night barking. Ordinary words. But beneath them, I felt something stir. Something that made the shop's hum fall away. When I left that night, I thought it would end there. Just a coincidence of seats and rain. But as I reached my door later, my phone buzzed. A message. From her. I don't remember giving her my number. It read, "Don't let the silence fool you. Sit with me tomorrow." I stood there in the dim hall, thumb hovering, heart refusing to steady. I didn't reply. Not yet. The message lingered on my screen longer than I care to admit. I read it once, twice, then tucked the phone face down on my nightstand, as if that would keep it from pressing into my thoughts. Sit with me tomorrow. Simple words, nothing loaded. At least that's what I told myself. The next evening, I found myself at her door before I even realized I'd walked there. She opened it barefoot, holding a mug of tea in both hands. The warmth of it carried into the hall, soft chamomile and lemon. "You came," she said, not surprised, not questioning, just stating it like the weather. I almost didn't. Most people don't. She stepped aside, letting me in. Her apartment was lived in a way mine wasn't. Books stacked along the floor where shelves ran out. A half-finished puzzle spread across the table. A lamp on, casting a glow that softened everything. It felt less like entering someone else's place and more like stepping into a memory you weren't sure was yours. We sat. She poured me tea without asking, the steam rising between us. I tried to find something ordinary to say, something to make it less obvious that I didn't know how to sit across from her like this. She saved me. You remind me of when I first moved here, she said. I was 22. Thought I knew everything. I didn't. Her fingers drummed against her mug. Quiet. I used to eat dinner alone every night. Pretend I was fine with it. I looked down, thumb pressing the handle of my cup too hard. I do that too. Not dinner, pretend. Her eyes lifted to mine, steady but not unkind. And suddenly the room was too quiet. That's when it hit me. The space between us wasn't just an apartment wall. It was years, entire decades. She was in her mid-40s, my guess, and I was barely into my 20s. The math pressed against my chest. The thought of what anyone else might see in this moment, the judgments, the raised brows, flashed through me like a warning. I almost pulled back. Almost. But then she laughed, low and unexpected, breaking the tension. What? I asked. You're fidgeting like you've been caught cheating on a test. I glanced at my hands. She was right. My thumb was circling the rim of the cup over and over. I tried to still it. She reached out, lightly touching the back of my hand. Just a brush. Nothing dramatic. But it landed heavier than any word could have. Relax, she said softly. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. I left not long after. Tea still warm in my chest, her touch warmer still. The door closed quietly behind me, but the weight of her fingers never did. After that night in her apartment, things shifted. Subtly. We still passed each other in the stairwell, still exchanged the same small comments about the weather or the mail. But underneath there was something heavier. The next time I saw her, it was in the lobby. She was coming in, balancing groceries in both arms. I offered to help before I could think. You don't have to, she said. I know. I took the bags anyway. Our hands brushed as she let go, and I felt her pause. Just a second. Then she looked away, keys jangling louder than they needed to. Inside her place, I set the bags down on the counter. She opened the fridge, not meeting my eyes. I caught myself staring at the curve of her shoulder, the way her hair slipped loose at the nape of her neck. And then footsteps, voices in the hall. She froze. A moment later, her neighbor knocked and poked her head in. Hey, just wanted to remind you about the association meeting tomorrow. Her tone shifted instantly, bright, casual. Of course. I'll be there. I stood there awkwardly, half-turned, not sure if I should smile or disappear. When the door closed again, the air in the kitchen felt heavier. You should go, she said quietly. I opened my mouth, closed it. She was already unpacking vegetables, her movements clipped, precise. I lingered too long, then finally let myself out. For days after, I tried to convince myself it had been nothing, just bad timing. But every time I saw her after that, her eyes lingered half a second longer than they should have. One evening, I found her sitting on the building's back steps, a glass of wine in her hand. She didn't look up when I came out, just gestured to the empty space beside her. You ever feel like you're living someone else's life? She asked, staring out into the dark street. I didn't answer right away. My throat felt too tight. She started again, then stopped. Her fingers tapped the rim of her glass, restless. I wanted to ask what she meant. Instead, I said, sometimes. The silence between us stretched thin, trembling. Car passed. Someone's window shut. She finally looked at me, and in that look was everything she hadn't said. All the pauses, all the careful retreats. My hand was on the step between us. Hers, just inches away. She didn't move it. Neither did I. I should have said something. Anything. But words jammed up in my throat. She leaned the smallest bit closer. Close enough that I could see the faint crease by her mouth, the way her breath caught. And then she pulled back. Her laugh was soft, almost self-directed. Too much wine, she said, rising before I could respond. I sat there alone after she went inside, my hand still open on the step, as if I was holding something she'd left behind. It happened on a walk. Not planned. Just one of those evenings when the air felt restless, and I ran into her outside by the mailbox. She had a jacket draped over her arm, like she couldn't decide whether she needed it or not. "Heading anywhere?" she asked. "Nowhere in particular." "Then walk with me." We didn't go far. Just down the block, past houses with porch lights flicked on too early. The sky was still holding on to a faint orange, stretched thin between buildings. Our steps fell uneven, then matched without either of us trying. She asked me about school, about whether I liked the city, ordinary things. But her voice had a slight tremor, like she was buying time with each question. When she fell quiet, I glanced at her. She wasn't looking at me, her eyes fixed on the cracks in the sidewalk. "Do people ever talk?" she asked finally. "About what?" "Us." She said it quickly, like ripping tape off skin. The word us landed heavier than it should have. "No," I said. Then quieter, "Not yet." She laughed under her breath, a sound that wasn't really laughter. "Not yet," she repeated. "That's the problem." We reached a small bench under a tree and stopped. She sat, smoothing her jacket over her lap, even though she didn't put it on. I lowered myself beside her, heart rattling against my ribs. She exhaled. "I tell myself it's nothing, just a neighbor I see too often. Someone kind enough to carry my groceries, sit for a tea. That's all. But then She broke off, jaw tightening. "Then I notice how much I wait for it." The confession slipped between us, quiet but raw. I swallowed. My fingers flexed against the bench. "I wait too." Her eyes finally found mine, sharp and searching. I couldn't hold the gaze long. I looked at her hands instead, the faint scar across one knuckle, the way her thumb traced the hem of her jacket like she needed something steady to hold on to. "You shouldn't," she said, but her voice cracked at the edges. Neither of us moved for a long time. A breeze shifted the leaves above us, and the world kept humming around like it didn't care what we were holding back. I thought about leaning closer, just an inch, about what it would mean if I did, about what we couldn't take back. Instead, I said, "Tell me to stop." Her lips parted, but no words came, just a breath, trembling in the space between us. I don't know if she couldn't say it or if she didn't want to. The silence stretched, taut as a wire. And in that silence lived the question neither of us dared ask out loud. The next morning, she was gone. Not gone in the dramatic sense. Her car was still in the lot, her curtains still half open. But she wasn't where I had come to expect her. Not at the coffee shop. Not on the back steps. Not even in the lobby where she always paused to check her mail, whether she had any or not. I told myself it was coincidence. People have lives. But by the third day, the absence had turned into something louder than presence. I caved and texted her. "You okay?" Simple, neutral. I waited an hour, then two. No reply. By evening, I heard voices outside her door. A laugh, not hers. A man's. Low, steady. I froze in the hallway, grocery bag digging into my wrist. Through the door, muffled words I couldn't piece together. Then silence. I almost knocked. Almost. Instead, I went back to my apartment and sat in the dark with my groceries still bagged. My phone lit up in my hand. The next morning, she was at the coffee shop again. Alone. Hair pinned neatly, shoulders squared. Like nothing had shifted. She saw me at the counter but didn't wave me over. Didn't even tilt her head. Just lowered her eyes to her book. I carried my cup to a table across the room, heart stuttering with questions I didn't dare ask. Halfway through, she looked up. For a second, her gaze lingered like before, soft, heavy. But then she caught herself, pulled it back. I should have left it alone. Instead, I walked over when I saw her gathering her things. "Hey," I said, voice lower than I meant. "Hey," she echoed, light but distant. "You've been busy?" Her pause was too long. "Something like that." I nodded, though it felt like an answer meant for someone else. She stood, smoothing her jacket. "You should focus on your own life. You've got time." It sounded like advice but felt like dismissal. I wanted to ask about the voice in her apartment. I wanted to ask why she remembered my coffee order if I was just a neighbor. But the words jammed in my throat, sharp as stones. She left before I found them. That night, I opened my drafts folder on my phone, wrote one line, deleted it, wrote another, left it unsent. I don't know what I did wrong. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. The hallway outside was quiet. Her door stayed shut, and I stayed on my side of it. It was late when it finally broke. The building was quiet, most lights out except hers. I passed her door on my way upstairs, groceries balanced in one arm, and before I could talk myself out of it, I knocked. A pause. Then the latch clicked, and she stood there in a sweater, hair loose, tired in a way that made her look younger. "You shouldn't knock this late," she said softly. "I know," I answered. The rest of it knotted up in my throat. She stepped aside anyway. I followed her in. The apartment smelled faintly of chamomile and laundry soap. A single lamp lit the room, throwing half the corners into shadow. She didn't sit. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching me like I was a decision she hadn't made yet. I set the groceries down without unpacking them. My hands needed something to do. "You've been distant." Her lips curved, but not in a smile. "And you've been waiting for me to explain." The silence stretched. She looked at her hands, then at me. "There's someone. My ex. He still drifts in and out. Not the way you think, but enough to make things messy." She exhaled sharply, like she hated admitting it. "And you," her voice faltered, "you're too young to be caught in someone else's half-finished story." I felt heat climb my chest. Not anger, just the weight of everything unsaid between us. "I don't care," I said, quieter than I meant. She studied me, eyes narrowing like she was measuring the truth of it. Then she shook her head. "You will. One day." I stepped closer, not touching her, just close enough that the space tightened. "Do you want me to stop showing up?" Her breath caught. That was the moment. The cost. If she said yes, I'd walk out and pretend the last weeks hadn't happened. If she said no, her hands trembled against her sweater. Then she lowered them, palms resting flat on the counter as if bracing herself. "I don't," she whispered. I don't know if it was relief or fear that flooded me, but my knees felt unsteady. For the first time, she didn't look away. She held my gaze, unguarded. I wanted to close the last inch between us. Every thought in me pressed toward it. But instead, I let my hand rest lightly on the counter near hers. Not touching, just there. Waiting. Her fingers shifted, brushed mine, stayed. No kiss, no declaration. Just that quiet contact. The weight of everything we hadn't said carried in the curve of her hand. She looked at me, tired but softer now, and said only one word. "Okay." Time didn't stop after that night. It didn't speed up either. It just went on in the small, ordinary ways. Mornings at the coffee shop. Sometimes she was already there by the window, sometimes I arrived first. The barista never had to ask my order anymore. Black coffee, no sugar. She'd glance at me over the rim of her mug, a small curve at the corner of her mouth, as if to say I remember too. Evenings changed. Not every night, but often enough. I'd find myself at her place, or she'd find herself at mine. The line between the two thinning until it hardly mattered. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we didn't. Tea steaming between us, puzzles half finished on her table, the dog from next door barking like he was part of the conversation. Once, weeks later, we walked past the same bench under the tree. She stopped, brushed the wood with her hand, and said, "Do you remember?" I nodded, sat down. She joined me. This time there was no hesitation in the space between our hands. It wasn't perfect. She still had her ex's number in her phone, though she never answered it. I still had doubts I couldn't name about age, about how it might look from the outside. But slowly, the doubts became background noise, like the hum of a refrigerator you only notice when it stops. One night, she admitted she couldn't sleep without chamomile tea anymore. Said it reminded her of the first time she let me in. I told her I still carried the habit of folding napkins, neat little squares I never used. She laughed, soft, surprised, and placed her hand over mine, flattening the crease. We built something out of small pieces like that. Not a grand story, not a headline, just two people finding the space to breathe a little easier when the other was there. The last time we sat at the coffee shop together, rain streaked the windows like it had the first week. She reached across the table, slid my phone closer to me. "You always leave your drafts unsent," she said. I looked at her, startled. "How do you know that?" Her smile deepened, quiet and sure. "Because you look like someone always mid-sentence." I laughed, shaking my head. But she was right. Maybe she'd always been right. Now, when I think of us, it's not the big moments that stay. It's 8:47 a.m., the exact time the barista set down 2 cups side by side. It's the way her hand lingered over mine at the counter. It's the silence that wasn't empty anymore. I don't know if that counts as love. I only know that when she said okay, the world felt less unfinished. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?